I never imagined my life would become so complicated. My name is Alex, and I am a college student working on my thesis. It has been a difficult process, filled with long nights and stressful days. But little did I know that the true challenge wouldn't be my academic work, but rather an unexpected situation at home. It all began on a Friday night after I had been burning the midnight oil all week trying to make progress on my thesis. By the time I dragged myself home, I was exhausted, and the house was quiet when I walked in, with the soft glow of the kitchen light spilling into the hallway. "Alex, is that you?" Sarah, my stepmother, called out. I responded from the kitchen, "Yes, it's me." My voice rough with exhaustion, I trudged into the kitchen to find Victoria at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. My father, Ryan, was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. "You look beat," he said, glancing up at me over his reading glasses. I nodded, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "This thesis is kicking my butt." Victoria turned from the stove, concern etched on her face. "Have you been eating properly? You look pale." I assured her, though my stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. Victoria laughed softly. "Sit down. Dinner's almost ready." I shook my head. "Thanks, but I think I'm just going to head to bed. I'm completely wiped out." "Are you sure?" Victoria asked, her brow furrowed. "You really should eat something." "I'm sure," I said, already backing out of the kitchen. "I just need sleep." "Well, good night, guys," I heard them both call out. "Good night." As I climbed the stairs to my room, as soon as my head hit the pillow, I was out like a light. I'm not sure how long I slept before I became vaguely aware of a presence in my room. In my half-asleep state, I assumed it was just a dream, but then I felt a gentle touch on my hand, and my foggy brain struggled to make sense of what was happening. I felt my shirt being lifted slightly, and something cold touched my skin. It was such a shock that my body reacted instinctively, muscles tensing. But I was so tired and so desperate for sleep that I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes or move. What happened next is something I'm still trying to process. I felt a hand gently caressing me in a way that was definitely not appropriate for a family member. My body responded, even as my mind reeled in confusion and shock. I wanted to speak up to ask what was going on, but my exhaustion held me in paralysis. Part of me wondered if this was just a vivid, strange dream, but it felt too real, too intense to be just a figment of my imagination. The touch continued, becoming more intimate. I felt a mix of panic, and to my shame, my body was betraying me, responding to the gentle caresses even as my mind screamed that this was wrong. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, when I was on the brink of forcing myself awake to confront what was happening, it stopped. I heard soft footsteps retreating. And then in silence, I lay there, my heart pounding and my mind racing. What had just happened? Who had been in my room? I wanted to get up to investigate, but my body was still heavy with exhaustion. Before I knew it, I had drifted back into a deep sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the events of the night felt like a distant, hazy dream. Had it really happened? Or had my stressed, overworked mind conjured up some bizarre fantasy? I stumbled downstairs, still groggy and confused. The smell of coffee and bacon guided me to the kitchen, where I found Victoria busy at the stove. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said. "You must have really needed that rest. How are you feeling?" I just stared at her, looking for any indication that something had changed between us. But she appeared perfectly normal, humming as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. "I'm fine," I said slowly. "Where is Dad?" "Oh, he had an early meeting with a client," Victoria replied, sliding a plate of food in front of me. "Eat up. You need your strength for all that studying." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Victoria bustled around the kitchen, chatting about her plans for the day, but I barely heard her. My mind was stuck on the events of the previous night. Had it really happened? And if it had, was it Victoria who had come into my room? I couldn't bring myself to ask what I had done. What if it had all been a dream? The thought of accusing my stepmother of something so inappropriate made my stomach turn. So I said nothing. I finished my breakfast, thanked Sarah, and headed back to my room to work on my thesis. But as I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, I couldn't focus. The memory of those touches, real or imagined, kept intruding on my thoughts. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to balance my thesis work with the confusing emotions swirling inside me. Every time I saw Sarah, I felt a mix of embarrassment, curiosity, and guilt. She, on the other hand, acted completely normal, as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until the following Friday that things came to a head. I had gotten out of class early and rushed home to work on my thesis defense, which was scheduled for the next day. I was so focused on my work that I didn't hear Victoria enter my room. "Alex." Her voice startled me. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I brought you some snacks. You've been working so hard." I turned to face her, my heart pounding. She was standing there with a plate of cookies in her hand, smiling at me as usual, but something in her eyes seemed different. Or was I just imagining it? "Thank you," I managed to say, taking the plate from her. Instead of leaving, Victoria perched on the edge of my bed. "How's the thesis coming along?" "It's okay," I said, struggling to keep my cool. "I'm just really worried about the defense tomorrow." Victoria's face softened with sympathy. "Oh, honey, you're going to do great. You've worked so hard." Before I knew what was going on, she had moved closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through me, reminding me of that night. I couldn't take it anymore. "I had to know," I said, my voice shaking. "Sarah, that night, last week, was that you in my room?" The moment the words left my mouth, I saw the change in her face. The friendly smile faltered, replaced by a look of shock, and then guilt. "Alex," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say, and in that moment, I knew it hadn't been a dream. It had really happened. My stepmom had come into my room that night and touched me in a way that crossed every boundary. And a small, shameful part of me said, "I'm curious. We should discuss this," Victoria finally said, something breaking the silence. I nodded, her eyes welling up with unshed tears. "We do, but not right now. Your father will be home soon, and you need to focus on your thesis defense. Can we talk after?" I wanted to protest and demand answers now, but she was right. I couldn't afford to be distracted when my entire academic future was on the line. "Okay," I agreed reluctantly. "Tomorrow." Victoria stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I apologize." With trembling hands, "Alex, I never intended for this to happen. I'll explain everything tomorrow. I promise." She exited my room, and I returned to my computer, my mind reeling. How was I supposed to concentrate on my thesis now? How was I supposed to face my father at dinner? Knowing what I knew, I had to try. I had worked too hard for too long to let this derail me now. So I took a deep breath, pushed all thoughts of Victoria and that night to the back of my mind, and dove back into my work. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a complicated and emotional journey that would test the boundaries of family, love, and morality. As I Saturday trying to focus on academic theories and research methodologies, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. Tomorrow would bring answers, but would I be ready? Would I be strong? The morning of my thesis defense arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread. On the one hand, I was eager to present the work I'd poured my heart and soul into for months. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the anxiety about the conversation waiting for me at home. I barely tasted the breakfast Victoria had prepared for me, my stomach in knots. She moved around the kitchen with forced cheerfulness, but I could see she was just as tense as I was. If only he knew the turmoil brewing beneath our seemingly normal family breakfast. The defense itself flew by as I presented my research, answered questions, and defended my conclusions. By some miracle, I was able to keep my personal issues from affecting my performance. When it was over, my advisor congratulated me with a wide smile. "Excellent work, Alex. You should have been proud." I should have been ecstatic, but all I felt was a sense of impending doom. As I made my way home, Victoria was waiting for me. When I arrived, she was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of steaming coffee in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her face a mask of anxiety and remorse. "How did it go?" she asked softly. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "That's wonderful, Alex. I knew you would." I cut her off, unable to maintain the pretense of normality any longer. "We need to talk about what happened." Victoria nodded, her shoulders sagging. "You're correct. Please sit down," she said. I took the seat across from her, wrapping my hands around the warm mug she had prepared for me. For a long time, neither of us spoke, so I finally broke the tense silence by asking, "Why did you come into my room that night?" Victoria closed her eyes and took a deep breath before meeting my gaze. "I don't have a good answer, Alex. I've been asking myself the same question since it happened, and I've tried to insist on an explanation." She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "You are correct. You do deserve the truth. The truth is, I've been struggling for a while. Your father is a good man, but he has been so distant lately, always working, that I felt constantly distracted, lonely, and unappreciated. I listened to my emotions, a swirling mess of empathy and discomfort. That night," Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'd had a little too much wine. I was feeling reckless, and I believe I saw your light on. I thought we could talk, but when I got to your room, you were already asleep." She paused and took a shaky breath. "I'm not sure what came over me. You appeared so calm, and before I knew what I was doing, you know what happened next." I sat there, trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to be angry and lash out at her for violating my trust and personal space, but another part of me saw the pain in her eyes, the genuine remorse in Sarah's words. "I'm so sorry, Alex." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "What I did was unacceptable. I betrayed your trust as well as your father's. And if you want me to leave, I will understand." The thought of her leaving and our family falling apart hit me like a punch in the gut. Despite everything, I realized I didn't want her to leave. I don't know how to move forward. How can I trust you after this?" Victoria looked at me, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "I don't know, but I'd like to try. If you're willing, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." We talked for hours, laying everything out on the table. Victoria shared more about her feelings of loneliness and neglect in her marriage, and I opened up about my own insecurities and the confusing mix of emotions her actions had stirred in me. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself feeling a strange sense of closeness to my stepmom, not in the inappropriate way of that night, but in a way I'd never experienced before. For the first time, "What will we tell Dad?" I asked as our conversation wound down. Sarah's face, "I don't know. Part of me believes he deserves to know the truth, but another part is afraid of what it would mean for our family." She nodded, looking miserable. "I love your father, Alex, despite everything I do. At the thought of hurting him like this, I understood her dilemma all too well. The weight of our secret felt like a physical presence between us. "Maybe," I said slowly, "we don't need to tell him everything, but we should talk to him about the underlying issues. Your feelings of neglect, the distance between you two." Victoria considered this, hope flickering in her eyes. "You think that would be enough?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe it would help prevent something like this from happening again." We agreed to take things one day at a time. Victoria would work on communicating better with my dad, and I would focus on finishing up my college work. We both promised to be more open with each other, to talk through any feelings or issues that came up. As Victoria stood to start preparing dinner, she paused, looking at me with a mix of gratitude and lingering guilt. "Thank you, Alex, for listening." She said truthfully, "I don't hate you. I'm still processing everything. But I don't hate you." She nodded, giving me a watery smile before turning to the stove. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind replayed our conversation. I felt a strange mix of emotional relief at having cleared the air, lingering confusion about my own feelings, and a new understanding of the complexities of adult relationships. I also couldn't shake a nagging sense of guilt by agreeing to keep part of what was something I shouldn't be. These questions plagued me as I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next few weeks were a strange dance of trying to maintain normalcy while navigating our new reality. Victoria and I were hyper-aware of each other, careful not to be alone together for too long, to keep a respectful distance. I threw myself into my schoolwork, using it as a distraction from the turmoil at home. Sarah, true to her word, made efforts to reconnect with my father. I came home from class one day to find Victoria alone in the house. She was curled up on the couch with a book. She said, startled by my arrival, "I didn't expect you to be home so early. The professor canceled class," I explained, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "Sarah, where is Dad?" "Working late again." I could hear the frustration in her voice and see the slump in her shoulders. Without thinking, I moved to sit beside her on the couch. "Are things not going well?" I asked hesitantly. Victoria gave me a sad smile. "I am trying, Alex. I really am. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough or if we've gone too far." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was genuinely trying to make things work. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching out to pat her hand for comfort. The moment my skin touched hers, I felt a jolt of electricity. Our eyes met, and the air between us became charged with an intensity that scared me. Victoria must have felt it as well because she quickly pulled her hand away. "I should begin dinner," she said, her voice trembling as she dashed to the kitchen. I sat there, my heart pounding. What was that? Why did I react that way to a simple touch? I retreated to my room, my mind a mess. I thought we'd moved on, that we'd put that night behind us. But clearly, there were still unresolved feelings and a dangerous attraction simmering beneath the surface. That night, I lay awake for hours, grappling with my conscience, knowing what I was feeling was incorrect. Victoria was my stepmother, my father's wife, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt towards her, the way my body responded to her presence. I thought about my dad and how oblivious he was to everything happening under his own roof. I thought about Victoria, trapped in a marriage that was slowly dying. And I thought about myself, caught in the middle of it all, trying to navigate feelings and situations I was woefully unprepared for. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly battling these inappropriate feelings. Something had to change. With a heavy heart, I began to pack a bag. Maybe some time away, some distance from this situation, would help clear my head. I could stay with a friend for a while, focusing on finishing up my last few classes. As I zipped up my backpack, I heard movement in the hallway. Victoria was up, probably starting her morning routine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. I had to tell her I was leaving and had to explain why. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. With one last look around my room, I opened the door, ready to face whatever came next. Little did I know, the most challenging part of this whole ordeal was yet to come. As I stepped into the hallway, backpack slung over my shoulder, I nearly collided with Sarah. She was on her way to the kitchen, still in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. Her eyes widened as she took in my packed bag and the determined set of my jaw. "Alex?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think it's best if I stay with a friend for a while." Sarah's face fell, a mix of understanding and dismay washing over her face. "Alex," she sighed, "is this because of yesterday? Because of us?" I nodded but couldn't meet her gaze. It's not just yesterday. It's everything. I can't keep pretending everything is normal when it isn't. And I need some space to figure things out. She reached out as if to touch my arm, then thought better of it, her hand falling limply to her side. I understand, she said softly, but could we please talk about it first? And foremost, your father will be devastated if you simply... Any mention of my father in my haste to flee. I hadn't considered how my abrupt departure would affect him.